very unpleasant when they're
Good afternoon, Earth.
unfolding.
This is Adam Sturch podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on an oil painting Easter.
And so forth and so on. So then having said
Alright, picking up from where I left off last time, this time with a cadmium yellow mix with a little bit of white in it, just to give it some opacity. And, yeah, start with the details and work my way forward.
Bad trips make bad sex look like no problem, which is an amazing thing to achieve. I don't know. You know, I guess part of the fun or part of the challenge of being psychedelic people is that our method, which is drop and wait, you never know. You know, you may think you know, and you may do your Rolfing and your go to Gestalt and just be scrubbed and drained and shined with all your enzyme systems up and going, and it can still just chew your ass unmercifully. It's one of those places where I, who am not necessarily that eager for astrological explanations, reach eagerly for astrological explanations. Because if everything else is right, and I've even noticed, you know, Moon in Scorpio for me is not a good time to do psychedelics. I also, you know, I before a large trip, I will throw the I Ching. And without spending too much time on the I Ching, I can't remember which hexagram it is, but one of the 64 hexagrams says, inquire again of the oracle if you have constancy, something else, something else, something else. And almost invariably, I mean, I have no idea how many times in my life, contemplating psychedelic trips, I've thrown that hexagram, the hexagram which says, ask again. And so then I ask again, and if it's negative, I don't do it. I figure, you know, you have right brain tools and left brain tools. Somehow this question about bad trips is about your pre-trip intuition, feeling into the situation. And then, of course, there are obvious rules. I mean, there are guaranteed situations which give you bad trips. I mean, taking too much of a drug with people you don't know, taking large amounts of a drug and mixing it with a lot of moving around in crowded social spaces. Synergies are simply combinations of drugs. You know, if somebody tells you they took ecstasy and then they snorted some ketamine and then they had a little nitrous oxide and some GHB, this is, God knows, I mean literally only God knows, because no clinical medical research is ever done on stuff like that. On the way people in the street actually take drugs is never studied by medical science. And synergies are where the strange things, the dangerous stuff happens, the heart fibrillations, the convulsions, the convulsive vomiting, the states of disorientation, prolonged states of sleeplessness, all of these things. So, you know, my attitude toward avoiding bad trips is, for social purposes, raves and beach parties and whatever, low doses. You know, it's almost a truism, or it is a truism, that if you want to come down from a drug, whether it's a psychedelic drug or any other drug, the very best thing to do is furious exercise. The guy who throws himself in the icy lake and swims across it, the guy who chops 2 cords of wood to come off some bender. Well, then dance club is almost like the perfect social situation designed to shorten a drug trip and dampen the effects. But people are such social creatures. You know, I've said in many, many times over the years, to the point where it's almost the McKenna method, although how you could think something so simple-minded was a method, was like the way to take psilocybin, for example, is take a stiff hit, like 5 grams if you're a 145-pound person, on an empty stomach, and lie still in silent darkness. Well, this is almost the opposite of, you know, and the idea is you want to concentrate on the thing itself, which is the drug projected against the black screen of your mind. You don't need doof coming in. You don't need smart drugs. You know, all of these things are actually distractions. And I think people are so reluctant to follow this advice because they actually have no faith in the drug. They think they will be bored. They think, well, if I did that, nothing would happen. Well, I'm telling you, you know, it's for ordinary people, isn't that what we said? This stuff is not for the swamis. They have their own methods. This is for the great unwashed masses of spiritually seeking humanity. So lay down in silent darkness and take a look. And then if the trip is really bad, then there are things you can do while it's happening that are helpful. The most obvious one is, or the most effective, I don't know if it's the most obvious, but I really believe it's the most effective, is if you get into a place that you don't like, and it's not physiological, it's not that you're having convulsions or vomiting, it's just that you're having thoughts which alarm you, you should sing. You can make whatever shamanic hash of this you wish, but the basic concept is to oxygenate your brain. There's something about bad states of mind on psychedelics that are very frequently, in my observation, accompanied by shallow breathing. People get, you know, when you thread a needle, everybody holds their breath. Nobody can thread a needle without holding their breath. It's like keeping your eyes open while you sneeze. A human being cannot do this. So when we are really following our thought at the level of threading a needle, we stop breathing. And if you're not paying attention, this can go on for minutes. This very shallow breathing, you know, you're not breathing, dude. So, so what the thing to do is to sit up and, you know, your favorite shamanic chant, Fleetwood Mac recitation or whatever, just belt it out. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it may matter. I mean, if you choose certain mantras or something, you know, haystacks will burst into flame, but, you know, and there's no obligation to be au courant or hip either. You know, it doesn't have to be Aphex Twins. It can be row, row, row your boat. I've always preferred, because it does contain the refrain, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. And if you're loaded on psilocybin or ayahuasca, the thought that life is but a dream opens ahead of you and becomes epiphanous instead of ridiculous. And then, I don't know, this is what I do. This is maybe not universally good advice, but when I take psychedelics like that, I have bombers rolled, and if things get weird, I torch them up, although sometimes then things get weirder. That you have to be careful with that. I mean, the way I do it, and I've really got this down, sort of, is with psilocybin anyway. It, people say it comes on in 10 minutes, it comes on in 20 minutes, and they're ripping in 40 minutes. It doesn't work like that for me. It consistently, and I always take it not in tea or anything, but just the mushroom, I eat it. At the hour and 10-minute mark, it begins to come on, I guess. I mean, there's a feeling of nausea and maybe coldness, and there's just like a certain window of opportunity where then if you smoke cannabis, it immediately begins the hallucinations very dramatically and moves you quickly through that clammy, handshaking part of the trip, which is sometimes alarming. Most of my experience with cannabis, it's improved if the trip was weird, it got better with cannabis. I have had many experiences where it was so strong the thought of smoking a joint was just like, I want to go into to take this as given here. We don't need to amp it up or push it sideways. But nobody does this a lot who doesn't then occasionally put in a very difficult evening. And, part of your psychic, I guess your shamanic constitution is how quickly can you come back from a really bone-shaking psychedelic experience, either because it blew your mind in some way or something appalling happened. I remember a number of psychedelic trips that were hard to come back from, but I remember one in particular years ago where my friend and I took a lot of acid, and late in the trip, like about 3:30 in the morning, he had a very dramatic epileptic seizure, and I had never seen an epileptic seizure, and oh God, it just set off this cascade of hysterical activity. The 911 people had to be called. I remember there was a real moment of truth in all this for me. I remember the apartment was on the second floor, and I saw the cop cars and everything pull up in front. We had flushed staggering amounts of dope, knowing that they were about to arrive. And I went tearing down to the front door, and I was completely loaded on acid, and I could barely stand. And I could see through the glass, the cop, and he said, "Open the door." We had locked the door earlier in the evening. He said, "Open the door." So I fumbled at the door for a few seconds, completely hysterically and ineffectively, and then I couldn't get the door open. So I stepped back from the door and said, "Shoot the lock on." And then I realized, dude, get a grip. You're going to have to, this is headed in the wrong direction. And the cop was like, so then, and then I remember, this trip to the hospital, and I don't know what was going on. It was Herrick Hospital. It was in Berkeley, which was also a mental hospital. This bed, me standing at the end of the bed, trying to figure out, is he dead? Is he alive? What does this mean? Who am I? What's going on? And then there was a person who was obviously an inmate of the stranger wards of this mental hospital, who was washing the floor with this big mop and sort of waltzing around us with this crazy expression and leaning over and looking at me and looking at him. And I just didn't know whether is this really happening, and if it is happening, why is it happening? And if it isn't happening, why do I think this is what's happening? And then finally the doctors threw me out of there, and I just walked the streets of Berkeley for hours, and my mind was like spinning, just saying, something terrible has happened, something terrible, terrible, terrible has happened. And it took days to realize, yes, he had an epileptic fit, here's what an epileptic seizure is, here's the drug, here's the prognosis, here he is, seemingly all right. He came through it in much better shape, it seemed, than I did. I mean, I was deeply spun by all of this crazy shit. And that's not an out-of-control drugstore. I mean, truly, I'm a very conservative person, so for me, that was an evening really getting beyond management. But some people start out like that. I had friends in the 60s in New York City who would say, in Manhattan, they would say, let's take 500 mics and hit the streets and mess with people's minds. Well, and quickly discover there are people out there capable of messing with your mind, and more than your mind. But sitting up all night in Manhattan diners just taking on all comers for mind games is, no way to spend an evening. Anyway, so much for the question, what do you do about bad trips? If you have character, you live through them, and after a few months go back to it. Many people, it's a bad trip that finishes them, personally. I don't think, you're ever really immune to it. The funny thing about psychedelics, I think, especially psilocybin, I've noticed, is it's incredibly gentle with beginners. It almost never bites the beginner, these clueless people who go to it with knees knocking. Usually, the doors of heaven open and they're sweating. It's the veterans, it's the old battle-scarred explorers who, come back from a certain given evening with their eyes bugging and a tale to tell.
And I primarily understand that there is no such thing as a bad trip. There is the wrong context, which is what you were saying in the story. That if you follow he's like you, he thinks I should shut out the world. And so you meet the demons and you go through the doors of hell and the belly of the whale and all of those other things that it's your ego running around, and you'll come out of that with information. And hopefully, if you really let yourself go down that far, the doors of heaven will open too. And then one begins to dance between those two spaces.
Yeah, the only place where I really think the concept bad trip is legitimate and it is true in my experience as well as my opinion is when you mess with the actual physical substances in some way. In other words, if you take pure psilocybin, pure LSD, well-made ayahuasca, there is no such thing as a bad trip. It will teach you. It may put you through hell, it may change your personality, but it's useful. Where it gets chancy is if you are physiologically compromised in some way. For example, and this is kind of controversial, so it's worth talking about, but in my opinion, it's a very bad idea to combine psilocybin with an MAO inhibitor. But people I respect, as much as I respect anybody, do this in their therapy. so I looked at this hard because the worst drug experience I ever had revolved around this combination. And I think my mistake, I did it differently than these people who use it therapeutically. As I understand it, the way they're doing it is they're inhibiting their MAO with, say, pagama harmala, and then they're taking a little bit of psilocybin. I have no judgment on that because I've not done it. What I did once, years ago, to my immense regret, was I took half a dose of mushrooms, 2.5 grams of mushrooms, and half a dose of ayahuasca, 50 milliliters of ayahuasca, and I put in a long, strange evening that felt dangerous to me. I mean, we only have my account, but something went on in that trip that I've never seen in any other trip, and I can describe it for you, and I even can have an analysis of it, but I'm not sure that the analysis is true. What happened was the trip seemed normal for the first hour or so, and then I in the part of the trip where I should have been smoothly hallucinating, roving, scanning, taking in data and learning, I noticed a rising anxiety that I couldn't control. And the anxiety was, it was a generalized anxiety. It was a feeling, a strong feeling that something was wrong. And so then I would like stop whatever my trip was, and deal with this feeling that something is wrong. And I would look around and reassure myself, nothing is wrong. You know, heartbeat okay, you're sitting in a chair, moonlight is flooding in, the cat is at your feet, nothing is wrong. So I would go back to tripping. 30 seconds later, something is wrong. And I would come out of it after about 4 or 5 times of this, and the loop was getting faster and shorter. I could, even on the trip, I analyzed what was going on. What was going on was no short-term memory was happening at all. I knew who I was. I could tell you my parents' story and so forth and so on. What I had lost was the last 30 seconds of my life didn't exist. And this may not sound like a problem, but in fact, it's like having your big toes cut off or something. You can't stand anymore. The absence of the last 30 seconds creates this bizarre sense of a vertiginous void behind you, and you keep looking around, and then it's there. You say, oh, it is there. Now I feel like it's not there. Oh yes, it's there. Well, this is crazy making, and it may not sound, so agonizing, but I found it to be as close to madness as anything I've ever experienced. And I felt at times that they'll just find me here, just gibbering. They'll just, throw a light net over me and take me by the elbow and lead me away. That'll be it. And then finally, and I had this very overlaying this thing was this very strong image from Stanley Kubrick's film 2001, where the guy is outside the spaceship in the little robot, and he fixes the thing, and then it's time to go back in, and he speaks to the main robot controlling the spaceship, and he says, "Open the pod doors, Hal." And the robot says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." He says, "Open the pod doors, Hal." "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." And I could almost see in my mind's eye, maybe because I think to some degree, chemical fashion or something, but I could see that a piece of machinery was jammed that we were in a loop, that it would not, it was screwed up at the molecular level. And I felt crazy. I felt violent. And my wife was sleeping upstairs. Finn was tiny. Clea hadn't been born. And I felt absolutely irrationally violent toward everybody and everything because of this odd collapse of my sensorium. And so then I said to myself, I will not leave this chair till this releases me. I just will sit here. Now that might have been a bad decision. In other words, I could have gone out and chopped wood, but I don't think that was the moment I picked up the double-bladed axe. And so I sat there and I deep breathed and I did every trick I knew, and after about an hour and a half, it just, I could see it rotate around, decouple, drift away, and then it was like, the trip begins again. It feels like a normal trip.
All right, I think I'm going to take a breather and do a second round. So stay tuned for take 2. All right, take 2.
There was nothing. It's amazing that the idea of magic could even get going in a world without the concept of electromagnetic fields, radiation, action at a distance. The whole vocabulary of electricity supports the idea that the world is, unified through magic, some kind of permeating medium where somebody can turn a dial over here and something can happen halfway around the planet. And I, imagine in a shamanic society, without the metaphor of electricity, how these drug states, how difficult it would be to build linguistic models of them. Because we always think in terms of fields, vibrations, permeating changes, discharge, potential, positive, negative, flow. Think of the models of the human body that are taught at Esalen. How meaningless all those vocabularies would be without these concepts directly drawn from a mechanical universe. The whole idea of flow, blockage, potential, positive energy, negative energy, balancing. I mean, these are essentially the terms of electrical engineering of the 19th century. Does that mean that these models of the body are real or correct? No, not at all. It means that the general understanding of the world that is our legacy as a civilization permeates everything. Permeates everything, whether we're conscious of it or not. I mean, even something as far removed from the engineering domain as falling in love is, you speak of the spark and being struck and drawn together and all metaphors from the technical domain. Yeah, did you want to say? I'm at the end of my glass of water. I may be at the end of my rope. Anything else this evening, or shall we knock it off here? On my list, I was going to actually talk more about aliens, but oh yes, only because I knew it was a crowd pleaser. Okay, well, what I just said is actually the lead-in into talking about aliens, because aliens are throw into high relief this question of about where is the edge of knowledge, where is the edge of the self, how do we image the world without contaminating our models with our technical assumptions. maybe some of you saw the New York Times on Sunday, there was a review of yet another book about aliens, and it talked about sightings that occurred in the 19th century, before the invention of fixed-wing aircraft in Kansas. In the latter years of the 19th century, there were several instances where apparently perfectly ordinary human beings landed aircraft on dusty roads, spoke briefly with farmers who were haying their crops, and then flew off. And well, so then now what does this mean in the light of the fact that by 15 years later aircraft had been invented and these things were happening? Is it that the future arrives incrementally, almost as a particulate gas, and first in fantasy and dream, and then, thank you, and then, more concretely later? The alien phenomenon in its modern form begins essentially in 1947, when an airline pilot flying near Mount Rainier reported these discs, this formation of flying silver discs, the standard image. And then it was just a few months later that the Roswell incident occurred, which the government, it's interesting if you actually go through the primary documents of the Roswell incident, the government immediately announced that it had captured a flying saucer. But then, within 24 hours, corrected itself and said, no, it was the detritus of a high-altitude weather balloon experiment. To me, the fact that the government immediately announced that it had captured a flying saucer doesn't indicate government collusion. It indicates government cluelessness. They were as stampeded as everyone else by the so-called Rainier lights. There was a climate of possibility in the mass psyche at that moment, for very good reasons. I mean, the human soul had just been exposed as an abyss, and by that I mean the news of the Holocaust and the death camps and the smoke was hardly cooled from all of that. The atom bomb had been used against human populations. The hydrogen bomb was right behind it. It was actually a moment in Earth's history where if there were cosmic observers, if there were cosmic policemen who come to naughty planets and correct unsavory social practices, we were probably, if there is any hit list, we would have been on it at that moment. Enough bad shit had gone down that there was every reason to expect that possibility. As time passed, it became clear that apparently no cosmic talk was on the way, no ticket was going to be written, and the UFO thing developed all kinds of strange adumbrations. I mean, one thing I think you have to assume is that anything which happens on a psychedelic drug at any dose level must occasionally happen without a psychedelic drug. Maybe 1 in a million. In other words, if you give somebody DMT, if you give 1,000 people DMT at the dose I tell you, 990 of them will see L's. Well, to see L's without DMT, maybe 1 in 10 million people have fleeting brushes with this. But nevertheless, 1 in 10 million is, 5,000 people on this earth who have that experience. That's a sufficient number of people for there to be a myth, a whisper, a buzz, as they say, that these things are happening. it seems to me ordinary experience is in a way less reliable than psychedelic experience, because the anomalous ordinary experience is almost never predicted. It just happens, you know. It always begins, I was just driving to my sister-in-law's when, you know, and then this thing breaks through. The drug as a tool to elicit the phenomenon gives you what you never had before, which is some kind of control over the appearance of the phenomenon. One of the things that's always puzzled me about psychedelics is that people who don't understand what psychedelics are about always ask the question, can you do it on the natch? You know, is yoga the same thing? Is meditation the same thing? Can this be achieved with diet, exercise? Well, the answer is A, no, and B, why would you want to? And the whole point is that this is what the drug does. You would not wish this experience to come upon you untriggered by pharmacological means, or you would have to wonder just exactly what your story was. That's what wanting to walk on water or move 120 miles an hour without benefit of machinery. It's just not in the cards.
Oh, fuck you just said, little kid. Just question, man. Reach down. You just...
Frank, I couldn't be happier for you. She is a beautiful girl.
Thank you, Woody.
My dream is to someday fall in love with a beautiful girl and for her to fall in love with me. We get married and have 3 wonderful children who grow up and move away from us and hardly ever write. She and I would grow old in an empty house together and die.
Well, this is, strikes me while I'm here that this is about the time of the year when my students are going around for job interviews, if they're lucky enough to get them. I say this is the time of the year when my students are going around for job interviews, if they're lucky enough to be invited. And if they are, they're expected to give a talk, technical talk, have a few questions. If they don't consult too many people on the faculty, they may even be offered the job. And I guess that's the same format, so I'll try not to insult too many of you, and maybe I have a chance at the award. Every self-respecting president has a doctrine attached to his name. For the current incumbent in Washington, that's been expanded from a doctrine to visions and dreams as well. But most presidents, it's just a doctrine. These doctrines are interesting to investigate. They're often important. I'm short, I'll keep just to the current Bush doctrine, which happens to be unusually prominent. Clearly articulated, very dramatically implemented, so there would be no doubt as to what it means, and widely discussed to an unusual extent. The Bush doctrine has several related components, all of them clearly articulated. I'll just quote. The first and most general component of it is that it is our responsibility to history to drive evil from the world. And that's a far-reaching doctrine. A special case of this has got to be a relentless war on terror, and furthermore, quoting, any state that harbors terrorists is a terrorist state and will be treated accordingly as we drive evil from the world. The third and more formal enunciation of the doctrine is the National Security Strategy of September 2002, which effectively declared the right to use force to eliminate any perceived potential challenge to U.S. global hegemony. As Colin Powell put it, the U.S. reserves the sovereign right to take military action where and how it chooses. He happened to say that in Davos at the World Economic Forum meeting, eliciting quite a negative reaction from the people who the business press, the international business press, call the masters of the universe. Only a slight touch of irony. The national security doctrine also, at the same time, the Bush administration made it very clear, some of the first aspect of the implementation of it was to make it clear where they stood with regard to international law and international institutions. Even before Powell's statement, the government had made it clear to the United Nations that it could be relevant, that was the term used, if it endorsed what the U.S. was planning to do anyway, or else it could be, as Powell explained, a debating society. But those were in effect the choices: be relevant and endorse what we're going to do, or you can have polite discussions, some of it.
I'm told that some people at the back can't hear you very well.
Try
Do you
this.
mind using a handheld?
Okay. Is this going to interfere with the other one?
That's better, I think.
Is that better? Shall I undo the other one? Okay. Well, this announcement to the United Nations of its choice between relevance and debating society actually has come to the, was right on the front page of the press in England, not here. Right now, in the Catherine Gunn case, I'm sure you know Catherine Gunn is being tried because she leaked to the British press reports that she had seen from the American embassy calling on British intelligence to illegally tap members of the Security Council so that the United States would know how to coerce or pressure them into becoming relevant, that is, endorsing what the U.S. was going to do. Those of you who know the history of the United Nations will recognize that this is coming full circle. The San Francisco Conference, which established the UN, at that conference, delegations were also illegally tapped by the FBI so that the U.S. would be able to control the proceedings properly. So we now have a nice completion of the circle. But that expresses from the beginning and dramatically today the attitude towards international institutions and international law. And it's not very surprising. It's pretty much the way anyone would predict that the world dominant power would behave. It may be surprising to people who prefer illusions, but historically it's not a great surprise. The national security strategy, the formal version of the doctrine,
All right, I think I'm going to call it for the moment. That's Adam Sturch podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Easter, developing the lower portions. I decided to take some bright light pink and surround these sort of floating shapes that are emanating from the rest, to sort of give the impression of bent light through the scrubby brushstroke leaf groundwork there. I kind of like that. That'll continue developing. Zoom in a little bit. Some of that was pretty small.
Imperial grand strategy and warning that it was going to cause.
So as you can see, it's developing slowly. I want all of those eye-onks filled. Wasn't quite so rigid with their alignment as I would like to have been, but in order to keep the rhythm flowing, so I had to kind of scoot some of them sideways away from the others. But it's still coming together with a pretty nice flow, so I like it.
Which undermines the UN Charter.
That's it. So have a good afternoon.
International law. In fact,
Thanks for watching.
undermines the whole Westphalian system since